Okay, it looks like I believe we have all of our panelists today, and everybody's mic is working. It is 5 after, so we gave a little extra time here for folks to join in case there were any connectivity or other issues. So I suppose, Josh, whenever we're ready, feel free to take it away and get us going.
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Josh Beck, and I am currently the acting local taxpayer advocate here in Iowa. And we just wanted to all, have this presentation today before the filing season starts rolling out here on February 12th. And as I think everybody is aware, the IRS and taxpayers and really all of us as a whole have been facing some unique challenges over the last few months. And I think one of the objectives of this presentation is to talk about how to make this how to make this filing season as smooth as possible and what sort of tips we have for you as taxpayers and clinicians regarding how to make this, as smooth for yourself or for your clients. And we just wanted to go over some of those tips with you today. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And sorry, as everyone knows, we're all working from home and have kids doing remote learning and dogs running around. So, can't promise there won't be any interruptions at all. The next slide here this reminded me of a game I play with my kids: red light, green light, yellow light, green light, go, red light, stop, yellow light, better, stop and think about this a little bit. So, as we go through this today, we're going to be talking about, sort of the things that are going to be like the red lights: stop, don't hit submit, because this could really potentially cause some issues for you or for the taxpayer down the road. And what are when do you get the green light? When do you get to hit that file button to hopefully, in many instances, possibly get that much anticipated and much needed refund? And what are some things that should sort of cause pause before while you're filling out that return? What are things that you need to think about before you hit that submit button? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over so we can get started and give you guys some of those hopefully really useful tips on how to have as smooth a filing season as possible. I'll turn it over.
Great. Well, I think I'm next. If we can advance to the next slide. My name is Andrea Buckley. I am the clinic director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at Iowa Legal Aid. It's really great that people could come to this today. We have a lot of information that we want to get out there. And of course, a plug for what we do with the Taxpayer Advocate Service and low-income taxpayer clinics. So before we kind of jump into specifics on tips for filing here this season, I just want to give a plug for low-income taxpayer clinics. So if you're not familiar with a low-income taxpayer clinic or an LITC, we are clinics that represent low-income taxpayers in a very wide range of things related to taxes. We represent taxpayers in tax court or before the IRS. We can address a number of issues for taxpayers. Generally, LITCs are not going to be preparing tax returns, even though I know that's what we're going to talk about today. I promise it makes sense why I'm bringing this up. The LITCs are not your tax preparers. We're not going to sit down and do your taxes every year like an accountant might, but we come into the picture often after tax time. If a taxpayer gets a notice from the IRS that there's an issue with their tax return, or maybe there's an audit that takes place, or an issue with collection of back taxes. That's what the LITCs do. We help navigate that system with taxpayers because it can be very overwhelming. We also provide assistance to people who are maybe new to this country or have language barriers. We educate taxpayers on their obligations and about the system as a whole, especially for those who may not speak English as their first language. It can be very daunting. So we are a free service generally. We're not allowed to charge. If we do, it has to be a very small fee. There's a link there up on the slide where you can find an LITC near you. There are clinics all across the country. Many of us on this Zoom today are either from Iowa or Nebraska. In Iowa, the local taxpayer clinic is with Iowa Legal Aid, which is my organization, and we cover the whole state of Iowa. If you're a Nebraska resident, you can contact Legal Aid of Nebraska, and you'll be hearing from their LITC staff members here as well. But we are really dedicated to helping taxpayers resolve issues that come up after tax time. So if we could advance to the next slide. So talking about tax time, if you're going to sit down and do your taxes yourself, or even if you are going to have someone prepare your taxes for you, there's some things that you'll want to do to be prepared. The first one might seem obvious, but it's not always obvious for some people. If you are working and you get a form W-2 with your wages on it, that's the information you're going to want to use for your tax return, not your pay stub from the end of the year. Not everyone will get a W-2. There's other types of forms that have income on there. So generally you will want to use the forms, the IRS forms that you receive from your employer or from other companies or organizations that you may get those forms from. The reason you want to look at that is the IRS is going to match information on your return with what is reported to it. So generally, if you get a W-2, your employer puts that information on the form and provides it to you. And the employer also provides that information to the IRS. So you want to make sure you're using the information that's kind of out there in the IRS system. And we're going to talk a little bit later about the system that the IRS uses to match income and look for errors and things like that. But right now, the important thing is make sure you're using your W-2 and your other official IRS forms that you receive. Generally, you're going to get those here. I believe employers are supposed to have them out to people by the end of January. So if you haven't gotten your W-2 yet, that's okay. You may still get it here soon. But that's the form and information you're going to want to use when you sit down to start doing your taxes. The next slide. All right. So you'll also want to make sure you're double checking that your information is correct. Again, this might seem obvious, but there's a lot of things when you sit down to do a tax return that you have to enter, whether you're using tax software or you're just pulling up a form and filling it in. I recommend that you have last year's tax return with you when you sit down to do this year's taxes. And there's some reasons for that. One is, making sure the information that is reported all matches up, right? So there's a lot of little things that can cause a problem when you go to file your return. For example, if you file a joint return with someone, you want to make sure your names are in the same order. If husband or, spouse one is listed first last year, you want to make sure you list them in the same order this year. Same with dependents. If you have kids on there, you want to make sure names are spelled right, that there's no typos, that you look at your W-2s and make sure that all of the numbers are correct. Taking some time to double check that information will help your return filing go much smoother and hopefully cut down on problems for the IRS to process your return. If you're doing the return yourself and you have someone that can double check your work, I really recommend that. I volunteer and do tax returns for folks during tax time, and we have someone who checks those returns for us as a reviewer. It just helps catch all those typos and make sure we're doing everything correctly. So that's a great option if you have someone that can double check your work. All right, next slide. And again, might seem obvious, but now that we're in a digital world, you may have some questions about attaching all of your required forms. So, you know, back many years ago when everyone was mailing things on paper, you would have to staple your W-2s and other forms to your tax return and mail it in. Some people still have to mail returns. There's a lot of situations where that might come up, but generally we're going to be e-filing a tax return. So when we prepare our tax return to be e-filed, we still want to make sure we're including all of the information before it's submitted. And so sometimes what might come up is you sit down, you fill in all the information from the W-2s, and you go to submit your form, but maybe you missed a W-2. That's pretty common with people who maybe work multiple jobs. They have a lot of forms. If you miss one, it can sort of gunk up the process later on. So even if you're just e-filing, you want to make sure you have all of your forms ready to go before you sit down to do that return. Taking that extra time, and I know at this time of year, there's a lot of, I think, anxiety for people wanting to get their returns done right away. They may be relying on that tax refund they're expecting, and they want to get stuff done right away. But taking that extra time to make sure you have all the information with you, ready to go, and part of your return before you e-file will definitely help your processing go a lot smoother and hopefully avoid problems down the road. So I'm going to turn it over to Shirley next, and you'll hear from me a little more later.
Hi everyone, my name is Shirley Pang and I am the clinic director of the Low Income Taxpayers Clinic in Nebraska at Legal Aid of Nebraska. And so I'll take the next few slides. I know a lot of you had questions about the economic impact payments, which is basically the stimulus that was released last year and the beginning of this year. So I'll try to go over some general information and some hypotheticals. And then if you have any other questions, you could feel free to ask them in the Q&A box, and then we'll try to answer them by the end of this webinar. So as you have probably heard, the second round of economic impact payments have been released starting last week of December of last year, with more payments in the last few weeks. And the direct deposit payments were issued first to individuals that had valid routing and account information that have been on file at the IRS. So they took all of your tax returns from 2019, found that information if there was an account number on there, and then issued the EIP payments in the last month. And then if you didn't have an account number there, they would have mailed the payments, either a paper check or a debit card. And obviously that would require more processing and mailing times. And then you can check the status of your payment online at irs.gov/getmypayment. So there is a Get My Payment link on the irs.gov website. You do not want to contact the IRS, call them, or anything like that, because they do not have any more information than what you can find on the Get My Payment tool or on the irs.gov website in general. And then you should receive a notice or a letter about the second payment eventually. If you received the first payment, you would have received a letter. And so what we advise for you is just to, if you haven't received your payment, go to irs.gov, Get My Payment toolbox. And I saw that we just shared it in the Q&A or in the chat box. And then you can see the status of when they mailed out their check and in what form of payment, either a direct deposit or a check or a debit card. And then to be eligible for this payment, generally you have to be a US citizen or a US resident alien. So basically a valid social security number. And then for the second stimulus, you may be eligible for $600 per individual, so $1,200 for a joint return, plus $600 for each qualifying child. And I'll go over qualifying child in a little bit. And that's based on your adjusted gross income on your 2019 tax return. So as long as you do not exceed $150,000 if married filing joint, or filing as a qualifying widow or widower, $112,500 if filing as head of household, or $75,000 for eligible individuals using any other filing status. And so if you were over that threshold, then your payment will be reduced by 5% of the amount by which your AGI exceeds that threshold. And we've gotten a few calls already about people not being able to access their stimulus payments because they were claimed as dependent on another taxpayer's 2019 tax return. So that would happen if you're a child or student and you're claimed on a parent's tax return, or a dependent parent who may be claimed on an adult child's tax return. So in that case, you may be eligible to claim it on the recover rebate credit on line 30 of your 2020 tax return. And they have a whole page about it on the irs.gov website, but I'll go over the recovery rebate credit real quick. And basically, in case you didn't get the stimulus payments either last year or this year, the way to get it on your 2020 tax return is to fill out that worksheet and put it on line 30 of that 1040. You have to file a 2020 tax return in order to make the claim for your stimulus payment if you didn't receive it at all, or if you didn't receive the full amount. So last year, the first economic impact payment was $1,200 per person, $2,400 if married filing jointly, plus $500 for each qualifying child. And this year's $600 per person, $600 per qualifying child. So you can claim the recovery rebate credit if you meet those eligibility thresholds I just talked about. And then you should have your letter from that first economic impact payment from the IRS. It's a notice number 1444 and notice 1444B for the second EIP. But if you haven't received it at all, then you just want to fill out that worksheet and claim it on your tax return. If you were claimed as a dependent, and you should be able to still file, and then the IRS on the backside will work out where that credit should have gone. If for some reason your Social Security number has been used already and you try to e-file and it doesn't work, then you would have to file a paper return, and that takes longer to process, but that's in case you can't file your e-file by e-filing, then a paper return is your next option. I know if you, another issue that has come up is that when people do check the Get My Payment tool, they don't recognize that bank account information shown in that tool. And so the IRS has recognized that this is an issue. And so they're automatically reissuing those payments for some taxpayers who don't recognize that bank account information. Unfortunately, you're not able to update your bank account information because there's such a time crunch in releasing the funds. So if you're eligible for the payment and you didn't get it, or if it was undeliverable to your address, they're not going to reissue that payment. You just have to claim it on the recovery rebate credit. Next slide, please. So premium tax credit, in case you are on the health insurance marketplace, you may qualify for payments like subsidies for the marketplace. And this is where the premium tax credit comes about. And you would need to submit Form 8962 with your tax return when you file your 2020, and then you should have received a Form 1095-A through the health insurance marketplace that shows exactly which months you are covered. And then in order to make sure they reconcile the credit that you're claiming with the health insurance premiums, you must attach that Form 8962 with your 1095-A with your tax return for 2020. And then all tax returns will be stopped during processing if that credit is claimed, but there's no Form 8962 attached. So with the premium tax credit, what we see at the low income tax clinic is for people who had a change in circumstances, either they got another job and they made a little bit more money, or they sold real estate or sold a rental property, and suddenly their income is different than what they initially put down in their health insurance marketplace application, they're going to end up with credit that the IRS wants back. So then they would owe quite a bit of money back to the IRS, and then we help with collection alternatives, but there's no way around that. So if you have a change in circumstances, because your premiums for your health insurance is based on that income that you report, you want to make sure that any change in circumstances, you make sure that you let the people who you signed up with the health insurance marketplace know about it right away, so that we don't come at the end of the year with a big balance based on, more income. And next slide, please. And then my last slide is, if you go to school and have pay tuition, you will get a Form 1098-T, a tuition statement from your educational institution, and then you can use that to claim education expenses. You want to make sure you have that when you do file your taxes. If for some reason you don't have that mailed to you or you can't find it, you want to contact your school and make sure that they resend it to you so you can have that correct information on your tax return. And I am done with my portion. And then the next section will be presented by my tax fellow at Legal Aid of Nebraska, Shailana Dunwall.
Hi, as Shirley said, my name is Shailana Dunwall. I'm a tax fellow with Legal Aid of Nebraska. So I work with Shirley doing the LITC work. So one of the other things that you need to be careful of is a lot of the tax software that people use, TurboTax, H&R Block, whichever one you choose to use, will automatically import data from the previous year. And the idea is that makes it easier. You don't have to type everything in again, but it's really important that you double check all of that data and make sure that it is still correct. Because if you automatically have data imported that is incorrect, the IRS is going to flag that and you may get audited. Another big credit that is important and a lot of our clients are eligible for is called Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC. EITC is a credit given to working poor families. So the income limits are dependent on the size of the family and the number of dependent children. You can use the EITC assistant tool to go through on the IRS website. It takes about 10 minutes and you input information about your family and your income. Then the IRS will tell you an approximate amount of the credit that you are eligible for, if you are eligible for it. It is important that you have social security numbers for all of the qualifying children before the due date of the return. So if, for example, you had a child born or adopted in December of 2020 and you don't have their social security number quite yet, you may have to file for an extension so that you have their social security number and can have them listed correctly on your tax return. Almost every filing status is eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit, married filing jointly, head of household, qualifying widow or widower, or single. However, people married filing separately are ineligible for this credit. And if you have questions about what filing status you have, you can go through on the IRS website or contact your local LITC and they can walk through that process with you. The Earned Income Tax Credit is available to US citizens and resident aliens. And there are some rules about who counts as a qualifying child. Generally, it is a dependent child, so a child living in the home for over 6 months and receiving the majority of their support from the taxpayer who is claiming them. Most often a parent, but it can also be a grandparent, aunt or uncle, step-parent. If you have questions about whether or not someone might be a qualifying child, you can contact your local LITC and we can walk through your situation and see whether or not the child might qualify for you. The amount of income that you can earn and be eligible for EITC varies. It changes each year. So, and it depends on the size of your family. So the number of qualifying children claimed. So you can see here, the larger your family is, the higher your income can be to still be eligible, which makes sense because you have more children to support. And it varies for single, head of household, or widowed versus married filing jointly is about twice as much. You also can't have very much income from investments and to be eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit. It really needs to be income that you earned working. Then the maximum credit amounts for the tax year, it's based on the amount of W-2 income you have. So the more you worked, the larger credit you get. It's really rewarding people who are working very hard with families. And the maximum credit amounts are listed on the slide as well. You can see the more kids you have, the more credit you're eligible for. And it's really a credit that applies very, very much to people with kids at home. It's not a very large credit for people who do not have children. Okay, so there are some common EITC errors, and this is one of the things that will get a taxpayer audited more often than almost anything else. So it's really important that you, if you think you may qualify for EITC, you just really double check these things and make sure that you file them correctly. So one of the things is people will sometimes claim a child who does not meet the residency or relationship requirements. Kind of mentioned them earlier. The child must live in the home and get over half of their support from the taxpayer. If you have questions about whether or not a child qualifies as, pardon me, living in your home, you can contact your local LITC, but generally that's pretty straightforward. It does have to there has to be some sort of relationship, like we mentioned, foster children, stepchildren, biological children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews. some sort of relationship like that. And there is a full list on the IRS website, or you can contact your local EITC. Again, it's really important that you report your income and expenses correctly. If you report those incorrectly and it results in a larger EITC credit than you are actually eligible for, that's something that the IRS is going to flag pretty easily. Also, filing, if you are married, you must file as married filing jointly or married filing separately. Even if you're separated, if you have been separated for at least the last 6 months of the year, you may be eligible to file as single or head of household, but I would strongly, strongly recommend that you do not do so without talking to a tax professional, because filing as single or head of household when married is something that the IRS is very much not a fan of. And then, as was mentioned earlier, it's just really important, again, to make sure that names and social security numbers are typed correctly and exactly matching as they are on the individual's social security card. So, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of resources for EITC. It's a complex credit, and you can, of course, contact your local LITC. We love to help with this sort of thing. You can use the EITC assistant on irs.gov to see if you and your family may qualify. And if so, it will give you an approximate amount that you can expect to get in the credit. TAS has a great EITC Get Help page, and there are some informational pages about the EITC on the IRS website. And then I believe we are turning this back over to Andrea.
Yes. So if you have been listening to all of that information and you think, oh my goodness, this sounds really overwhelming, maybe I don't necessarily want to do my own tax return after all, there is a free place you can go for help. There are 2 programs that are really great, and a lot of people don't realize they exist out there, so this is a great opportunity to tell you all about them. We have the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program called VITA, and there's also Tax Counseling for the Elderly, which is TCE. These programs are programs that are set up to provide basic tax return prep for free. It is aiming at taxpayers who are generally making less than $57,000 in 2020, and that can be, you know, on a joint return or a single return. That's sort of the general threshold for folks who can get help through VITA and TCE programs. These programs are set up and staffed by volunteers. And I mentioned earlier that I volunteer during tax time. I volunteer through a VITA site. And so the volunteers who want to do taxes for people, which is an interesting subset of folks, we have to get certified. We have to take tests. We have to do a training. We have to be up to date on our changes to the tax law to make sure that we do your tax returns right. So in that sense, that's a really good feeling. You know, like I said, you heard all of this information and think, whoa, this might be too complicated for me. The volunteers that can help you through these programs are going to know what to do. I mentioned earlier about having someone review your work in the VITA sites, and I believe the TCE programs as well. We are required to have a quality reviewer to check our work essentially to make sure we have prepared the tax return correctly. And that quality reviewer also has to take a certification test. So, you know, VITA sites are very diligent in making sure they're doing your taxes correctly. They are like other commercial preparers where they can e-file your tax return. So, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I don't want to do my return myself, should I go to a VITA site or, you know, to a paid preparer somewhere? there's no difference in the way that we're going to submit your return. You're not going to get your return processed faster if you go to a commercial preparer versus a VITA site, because it's all e-filing through the IRS system. So that's really great. I did mention sort of offhand that sometimes people do have to mail a paper return instead of e-filing. A VITA site, you know, if you're in a really specific situation, I won't even get into all of the things that might be. It's not very common. But a VITA site could prepare your return and print it off for you. So even if you think you have to mail your return, that's something the VITA and TCE sites can do. And of course, the VITA and TCE sites are completely free. So they're a great place to go. You're not paying the volunteers to prepare the return. We mentioned the stimulus payments earlier. Some people generally don't file a tax return, but they may need to file this year because they want to claim that recovery rebate credit. You know, they didn't get the stimulus payment up front, so they need to file that tax return. For those folks, this would be a great place to go to do those returns. So they're not paying someone to claim that credit. So if you know someone that is interested in doing this, or now that you think, oh, hey, I'm going to do this myself, you can find a VITA or TCE site by going on the IRS website, and I can drop that in the chat here in just a second, that link. You can also call 211. Generally in your community, a lot of VITA and VITA sites are coordinated by the United Way. So if you have a United Way in your area, they may be the organization that's sort of coordinating. In Iowa, we have a lot of VITA sites that go through the Iowa Extension offices, or TCE sites. Often the AARP is coordinating some of those. So there's a lot of different organizations that may coordinate those. So you can try calling 211 or going to that link, and I will drop that in the chat here in just a second, so you have it where you can click it. Some of the sites, generally e-filing isn't open yet, and so many VITA sites aren't starting to do returns yet. Each site is a little different. So if you go on that website and you don't see a VITA site near you yet, I would recommend you try back in another week as we get closer to February 1st, because sometimes those sites show up on the website as we get closer to tax time. So it may not be up there yet, but there may be a site near you. Just check back, and hopefully you can find that in your community. And so I will turn this over to our friends at the Taxpayer Advocate Service, and they'll go into their side of what they do over at TAS. So take it away.
Okay, hi everyone, it's Josh again. I'm back, and we've gotten some really great information, I think, so far about sort of how to avoid problems. And just a shout out to what was being covered earlier to our VITA volunteers and to the low-income taxpayer clinics, which that grant is administered by Taxpayer Advocate Service. These are, we're really lucky to have such great practitioners in both the Nebraska and Iowa area to provide, representation to low-income taxpayers in their controversies, tax controversies with the IRS. And also, the VITA site volunteers, it's quite a time commitment and quite an endeavor to take that exam and volunteer. So, we're really grateful to all the people that are supporting to help this filing season, go as smoothly as possible and provide services to taxpayers, especially, those taxpayers who may need a little extra support. So that's sort of like, well, where does TAS come in? Who are we? I feel like we sort of dropped this like philosophical question in here or something, but who we are at Taxpayer Advocate Service is we're an independent organization that is here within the IRS, here to assist taxpayers when they cannot get their problems resolved with the IRS through their normal channels, and to protect taxpayer rights. So, we were created as part of the 1998 Restructuring and Reform Act. And, prior to that, we were sort of like a problem resolution office. And after that piece of legislation was signed into law, we kind of got new authorities, and we have new sort of different statutory obligations or requirements. So as I mentioned, we're independent, although we're in the IRS, and that's all by design. The National Taxpayer Advocate, who is leads the organization, reports directly to Congress in terms of, any tax administrative issues, and works closely with IRS leadership to get those issues, resolved. But on the ground, our primary purpose of who we are is to assist those taxpayers who, have, filed the return, something goes wrong, or there's a liability that is an issue that they're having trouble getting resolved. And that's where we come into play. So the next slide here is just, what do we do? So, I sort of think of TAS in two chunks. I think of the case side of things and the systemic side of things. So, despite having, trying to get this resolved, your issue resolved with the IRS, you're still having problems. And that's where we come in. We're your voice at the IRS. And whether, a taxpayer is having a hardship, a financial hardship, or they've, run into an issue where they've tried to work with the IRS and it's not getting resolved and it's taking longer than it should, or that there's a policy or procedure that they believe is not being implemented or applied correctly, and potentially is, not the application of that policy or procedure is not in full observance of their taxpayer rights, which we'll talk earlier. That's where we would come in on the case side of things. On the larger, more systemic issues, we come in when we see maybe trends in those case issues, or a taxpayer or a practitioner points out one of those policies or procedures that they believe is not being applied properly. We will look into that. I think that's going to be covered later. We look into that in TAS, and we make recommendations, to the IRS. Both, through our relationship with the IRS and through, reports that we're required to submit on how those issues can be resolved. So, we, as I mentioned, that is sort of our primary role. Some of those things are going to be covered here in a little bit in terms of more details on how you can get our assistance and how we can better help. But in regards to those larger issues, I think this will be covered later too. We do have a SAMS website. It's a systemic advocacy management system that you can submit those issues on as well. So, we can try to get those issues resolved and relieve taxpayers from running into those barriers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart in Nebraska, and Ben, and he'll take it from here.
Hey, thanks, Josh. I'm Ben Schuring, and I am the local taxpayer advocate for Nebraska with the Taxpayer Advocate Service. And as Josh said, we are an independent agency within the IRS that helps taxpayers. Lots of great information shared so far, so I'm hoping I can build on that here. And what we've got is some Taxpayer Advocate Service options for self-help. Taxpayers don't always need direct services. Sometimes they just need access or pointed in the right direction. Oftentimes, finding the information that they need can be challenging. And so TAS has developed a thorough and pretty complete website that I'm going to walk through a little bit here and show you how we can help you help yourself. So our website, which is taxpayeradvocate.irs.gov, has self-help information on a variety of tax-related topics that include step-by-step instructions on how you can work through the problem directly with the IRS. Our website is designed to help taxpayers and also tax professionals, and parts of it are also available in Spanish as well as in English. It is also viewable on mobile devices, as we know that has become popular, and often, you know, when we receive things from folks, they're sending and receiving on mobile devices. The website screenshot that you can see here shows our main Get Help page. As you can see, like most sites, it's got a search box and also a what if section and a by category or by alphabet option to also try to look up your exact issue. Please note, of course, you know, not every topic is shown on the screen. This is just a quick screenshot. There are many, many more to choose from. Not shown is a section for our digital tools called estimators that can help you determine eligibility for certain healthcare related tax credits and estimate the total credit you may claim. So some of those items that were referenced earlier. Lastly, at the bottom of the page are some buttons that will take you to a listing of your rights as a taxpayer and also to a Contact Us page. Once you choose the topic closest to the issue you might have, you're going to see some information that's laid out in the following type of format. It's going to have a description and explanation of the issue. It's also going to have a what should I do section, explaining the steps that you can take yourself to try to resolve it. It will also include a how will this affect me section that explains how the issue may affect you, your account, and what might happen if you do not take action. It also has a what are my resources section that will give you a listing of all the resources available that relate to the issue that you presented, ones that have more information about the topic, and ones that link to forms or other products needed to take those actions. In addition, and this is going to be covered in a little more detail, but it will also include a what are my rights section that describes your rights as a taxpayer specifically related to the issue. And you can see on that screenshot several options that are on there: resources for taxpayers, tax news and information, reports to Congress, and some other really important and useful resources that'll be covered a little bit later as well. And lastly, there's a wait, I still need help section that lists other options for how and where to get help. Our website also has information on choosing a tax return preparer. I know that really great information concerning some preparation assistance was covered concerning VITA and TCE services. So if you decide you want to enlist the help of a tax professional outside of those services, choosing a tax preparer option is available, as well as some tips for what to do if you have hired one but received improper care, or the preparer you chose has performed some actions that you're concerned about, potentially being illegal or considered misconduct. And that's something that can happen to anyone. So we've provided some tips on choosing a tax return preparer if you're unable to take advantage of some of those services and assistance that was discussed earlier. Our TAS website also has information on free or low-cost services, like I mentioned, concerning VITA and TCE. So if you have a federal tax-related problem, this is a great place to start. Go here simply if you wish to learn more about a certain tax topic before filing a return, or you just want to learn more about, you know, for example, we've got the coronavirus or COVID-19 updates for individuals and businesses as well. So on the next slide here, once we switch it over, we're going to have some information for where you can get help with federal tax issues. So as we mentioned earlier, again, always try to resolve your problem with the IRS first. That's generally the best place to go, is to the source. But if you can't, you know, you should consider coming to the Taxpayer Advocate Service or an LITC program for some assistance. We're available here in TAS if you can't resolve your tax problem through normal IRS channels. And we also help taxpayers whose IRS problems are causing financial difficulty or significant cost to the taxpayer to try to resolve. Our help is free and it's for everyone. We help all types of taxpayers. That might include individuals, businesses, nonprofits, so on and so forth. So again, if you can't resolve your tax problem through normal IRS channels, we might be here to help. You may also, again, if you're having those financial challenges or some hardship, that might also make you eligible for our assistance. And if you qualify for our help, your case gets assigned to an advocate that is with you at every turn and will do everything possible within our abilities to help you resolve the issue. Again, our services are free, and we're here to help any taxpayer that has an issue. We have a new online tool also I just wanted to plug and mention that can help you determine if it is time for you to call us for assistance. It's taxpayeradvocate.irs.gov and a whole bunch of markings and things after that. So I'm going to go ahead and post that in the chat here for everybody to have. And then if we could take it to the next slide, please. So earlier, I believe Andrew addressed some issues regarding, using your Form W-2 and official forms as opposed to pay stubs. I believe Shirley covered some information concerning complete forms and Form 8962, so on, and et cetera. I'm going to talk a little bit about when that might get caught, when a return might get caught up with the IRS, and that's tied to the IRS integrity and verification operations. In case you didn't know, IRS computer systems compare the income and information that you report on your tax return against or to what has been reported to the IRS by those same third parties. When income and federal income tax withholding don't match up, this can certainly, cause a delay in processing of the return, and, for many, delay issuance of a refund. So I'll share just a quick example. You report $300 of federal income tax withheld on your return, yet your employer reported $30 of federal income tax being withheld, which is also what is listed on your W-2. That difference of albeit small, that difference could cause your refund to be delayed as it doesn't match what was reported to the IRS. And this also ties back to the importing of the information from the prior year and double checking that. Although it may come from the same source, you want to make sure that it's accurate. So this is why it is so important to review payer information forms when you receive them. That way, and I know we've seen this quite often in TAS, and I'm sure the clinicians have as well, but that way you can contact that source to try to get it corrected and get that correction process started as soon as possible. Ideally, and certainly preferably, try to get that discrepancy resolved before filing. Then your return and any refund that you might be due should not be delayed when the verification process that IRS will put it through is complete. The reasoning IRS engages in this review and verification is to ensure accurate returns are processed, and then of course, to help stop or identify fraudulent returns before refunds are issued when they shouldn't be. As we all know, there's a lot of fraud and identity theft and other problems out there, and so steps like this help ensure refunds aren't going out that shouldn't, and that also accurate returns are processed for folks so they don't run into a whole bunch of other host of other issues. May I have the next slide, please? So just a little bit of information about if the Taxpayer Advocate Service is able to take your case and assist. How does that work? Well, I mentioned a moment ago that you'll be assigned a case advocate who will be with you every step of the way, and they'll provide you periodic updates and work on your case. And in addition to those things, we also provide some other important service, which includes just listening to the taxpayer. Often taxpayers feel like they haven't been heard, and as will be covered shortly, taxpayers have that right. We'll also help you understand what needs to be accomplished in your case. Sometimes taxpayers just aren't entirely sure, and the notices they receive aren't entirely clear to them. So we can help kind of work through, shed some clarity on things, and understand what needs to be done to resolve the issue. And then also, of course, stay with you until the end of the IRS administrative process. Generally, it isn't a situation where, we kind of tell you what needs to be done and take a couple steps and then cut the taxpayer loose. We stick around until the issue is resolved and we can confirm that in some way, and see it through to the end. Taxpayer advocates employees, Taxpayer Advocate Service employees, know the IRS. We are part of it. We are independent, and they also know how to navigate it, and it can be complicated. And so, TAS employees will be there right with you until the end, until the case is resolved, which is really important. So with that, I think I will pass it back to my counterpart over in Iowa, Josh, to discuss a little bit about how we've helped some taxpayers here in TAS.
Okay, yep. And Ben, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. But I guess this slide is TAS. I guess we're going to toot our own horn a little bit here. But, we really, as I think we've mentioned, our mission, primary mission is to, assist taxpayers that are having problems resolving their issues with the IRS and to be their voice within the IRS. Because, although most things, most people who file returns, it goes very smoothly. There are a number of taxpayers that have problems, and anytime you're dealing with a bureaucracy, a big bureaucracy like the IRS, it feels very overwhelming to the taxpayer. And, as been mentioned, we want to be here to assist the taxpayer navigate that and, every step of the way. Some of the things that we have helped with, here recently and really over the years, in terms of taxpayers and their issues. For instance, as Ben was mentioning with the income verification operation, getting alternative, sometimes we have to get, documents to help them verify the income or withholding, taxpayers, situations, it's not always clean, right? So, if you have expenses that you're claiming on your return, sometimes taxpayers don't have the exact documentation that the IRS would like to see. So we help with alternative documentation. And we've, worked with the IRS to substantiate those expenses by providing that alternative documentation. We help with collection alternatives. So when we say collection alternatives, that would be getting somebody into an installment agreement, or sometimes that's a standard installment agreement, which would just be sort of streamlined, a certain payment every month. But then there's also other collection alternatives, for instance, such as offering compromises depending on the circumstances of the particular situation. There's also assisting taxpayers who have been subjected to refund fraud. And also there have been, there are issues for identity theft, helping businesses who maybe have had getting a return of levy proceeds. So, there's a number of situations where, the IRS is obligated under the law, or at least has the discretion under the law, to return levied money. And if, there's specific requirements for that, but those are situations in which we've helped taxpayers with those situations. A lot of the things that we just mentioned, like the earned income tax credit, we went over some of those requirements in terms of relationship. There's requirements about how long the dependent has to be living with that individual, showing documentation for that. Working their earned income documentation for that. So, we've assisted with that as well, kind of showing when those situations don't always lend themselves to, the exact documentation that the IRS would prefer. We've worked with the taxpayer to get the documentation that would substantiate those requirements so the taxpayer can get that earned income tax credit, or maybe the advanced child tax credit that they're entitled to. So
And hey,
I would say,
hey,
that,
Josh, this is Ben. Do you mind if I jump in real quick and just
no,
build on
please.
that? Josh made some great points there, and I just wanted to kind of piggyback off that a little bit. Sometimes what we run into, and I'm sure Josh will echo this, are situations where the taxpayers provided, you know, what we in TAS view as complete substantiation or proof that they are eligible for, you know, the credits or benefits that they may have claimed on the return. Sometimes the issue we run into is it's not always neat and clean, like we've talked about. You know, it's not always easy to get something that says exactly what you need it to say and use that as proof. So where we can oftentimes help is be the taxpayer's voice at the IRS and tell their story in a way that helps IRS understand, look, you know, life doesn't always fit necessarily into a nice kind of neat compartment here, and sometimes things can be complicated. And so, you know, sometimes we, you know, not only are advising taxpayers as to alternative documentation or other ways to prove their claims, but also, you know, taking a stand with the taxpayer when appropriate to say, hey, you know, we think this is enough, and here's why you should agree, when we're providing some advocacy service on behalf of the taxpayer to the IRS. So I just wanted to jump in there and share, you know, sometimes we do feel it is enough and sufficient. And in those situations, you know, we don't want to burden the taxpayer, and we'll take a stand and back them and provide that support that I was kind of talking about earlier. So didn't mean to interrupt you there, Josh, just wanted to chime in real quick.
No, I think that's great. I do want to, that just sort of reminded me of something, and I don't want to go too far off course, but you know, I did just want to kind of tie that earned income tax credit discussion, and maybe this had already been done, in with the income verification operation discussion. And as part of, you know, the IRS's refund fraud program, you know, a number of returns where that information is being verified, income and withholding, are returns where either the EITC or the ACTC, Advanced Child Tax Credit, has been claimed on the return. Now, they're not looking at the legitimacy of the claim, those returns being claimed, but they are looking at the income or withholding on those returns that were being claimed. And I just wanted to reiterate that that's all the more reason, you know, for taxpayers to be very diligent about, as I think Ben was saying, you know, if you had withholdings 300, you know, but it was really 30, or at least that's what the W-2 showed, you know, you need to be very diligent about that, because that could, you know, for some, delay the issuance of the refund. And a number of those returns have had EITC or ACTC claimed on them. And I think this may have been mentioned earlier, but just to be aware that under the PATH Act that was passed a couple of years ago, those returns where the EICTC has been claimed or the ACTC won't be issued. You know, this year, I mean, filing season's a little later, so you know, it's not so much of an issue, but they won't be they're not issued till the middle of February. And like I said, I think filing season's February 12th, so it's sort of a wash this year anyways, but in past years, that has kind of been something to be aware of. I will go to the next slide, which is about the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So this is something that was a huge sort of push for TAS a few years ago. Primarily the former National Taxpayer Advocate, Nina E. Olson. This was one of her major objectives, was to get the IRS to adopt a Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And really the idea, this is, I think we have a picture here of publication 1. The idea of this was to have, you know, 10 sort of nice, tidy rights the taxpayers, you know, sort of like the Bill of Rights, and, you know, in terms of the accessibility of a nice, you know, neat 10 clear Bill of Rights that taxpayers can really depend upon and rely on, and expect that the IRS is going to observe those rights. You know, the these 10 rights, you know, I think a lot of them are things that you would expect, you know, the right to be informed, the right to quality service, the right to be heard, the right to challenge the IRS, you know, the right to appeal a decision, confidentiality, the right to privacy, the right to a fair and just tax system, and the right to representation. You know, so I think a lot of those are things that, you know, you maybe would expect, and, you know, sort of are common themes throughout many of our systems. And we wanted those, even though a number of rights are sort of set out in the tax code, TAS believed it was important that those rights could sort of be bucketed into these 10 rights in something more tangible. And back in 2015, those rights were actually codified in the tax law in IRC 7803, and the IRS, you know, has to ensure that their employees, you know, are aware of these rights and, you know, observe these rights. And, you know, we've worked over the years closely with the IRS to ensure that, you know, sort of these rights are being integrated into their communications with taxpayers, their interactions with taxpayers, whether it be through written correspondence or their interactions over the phone. And, you know, that is one of our primary jobs here in TAS when we're working with taxpayers to get their problems resolved, is to ensure that those rights, you know, are being protected. So I think it's something to be aware of if you, you know, as you have your interactions, or if you have interactions with the IRS, this is something for you to be aware of as you navigate that process to ensure that those rights are being protected and observed. So with that, I will send it over. I'm not sure if it's Ben or one of my other TAS colleagues.
I believe it's going to CJ.
That's right. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Josh. My name is CJ Harris, and I am also with the Taxpayer Advocate Service. I'm on the side of the house that Josh had alluded to before, that there's that field side of the house, and then there's that side of the house that works with systemic issues and such like that. And so that is where I work out of as a management and program analyst. And I really wanted then to discuss with you, you know, what else does TAS do? And that's where we get to the point that we really work and address large scale systemic issues that affect many taxpayers at once. And when we get those issues that are brought into us, we can raise those concerns when we verify that, hey, yeah, this is a concern. And we can work with our liaisons and our colleagues, the senior leaders across the IRS, and say, hey, you know, we have examples, or this is what is going on. Let's find a resolution of how to fix this, and really advocating for the taxpayer for a better resolution for them on a large scale point of view. So we really help the Taxpayer Advocate Service really tackle those big picture problems that occur in the IRS or the tax law, and you assist us by reporting them to us. And you can do that by really what is called the systemic advocacy system. Josh had referred to that earlier, and I'm going to just put that link in the box for you right now. But really what we encourage folks to do is to, if you find or come across an issue that you believe is really a big picture issue, to go ahead and click on the link I provided to you. It will bring up a screen that says, hey, report a systemic problem. And then you just follow the instructions that's on the screen for submitting that issue to what we call SAM, Systemic Advocacy Systems. And then the people on my side of the house, the systemic advocacy, will then, and we'll look at the problem, we'll say, hey, what are those next steps that we need to do to resolve it? And we always keep in mind the issue, how the issue affects many taxpayers. So when you do submit the issue, please don't submit any individual problem that may only be affecting one taxpayer. We're looking really for those issues that would affect many at the same time. And when you do place information about the issue on the website, please make sure do not put any personal taxpayer information like names, SSNs, and the such in that information. But I also want to touch base on a success story of what we've had from someone who submitted something in SAMS. And that was specifically on an account transcript where you've asked for, hey, can I get a documentation that shows everything that's happened in my account? And so you could get that on account transcript. And there is a line on there that you may have seen in the past that said currently not collectible, but it didn't say whether it was hardship or not hardship, right? It was really just vague. Well, that is a success story with TAS that came through SAMS that said, hey, you know what? Is there any way that we could put on there that this is currently not collectible as due to a hardship or a non-hardship? And so we reached out to the IRS counterparts and said like that, and they agreed, hey, that's a great idea. And so just as of the last couple of weeks, you can now see that on your transcripts. Now, there are a few little bugs that we're working out, but that gives you an example of what a submission from folks from SAMS can do. It can have a large effect on taxpayers that are out there to provide the correct information and further information to help them know what status their account's in.
Hey, CJ, can I just add something to that?
Josh.
So kudos to CJ. She's been working on that project for a long time, and it's really a great outcome. It maybe seems like something that, you know, on the surface maybe is sort of minutia, but you know what's really important about that is if you're in CNC hardship or if your taxpayers in CNC hardship, there are certain things the IRS should not be doing. So for instance, if you shouldn't be, you know, the IRS has a private debt collection program, and they should not be sending your account or a taxpayer's account to a private collection agency if you're in CNC hardship. There's other things, you know, collection actions they shouldn't be taking if your account's in CNC hardship. So I think that was a really great outcome because, you know, if something's going on, you know, practitioners or taxpayers would get the transcript, and we'd get a lot of situations where they say, but it says I'm CNC hardship. And then you go look at it and it says, oh, it's not that kind of CNC hard, status on the transcript. And I think this will give a lot taxpayers and clinicians, practitioners, a lot more knowledge about what's going on with the taxpayer and with their account and what should or should not be happening. So I just kind of wanted to, you know, bring home how great that end result was, CJ, that you and others in systemic advocacy were able to achieve.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. And thank you for expanding on that because it is really key because a lot of times you just see the currently not collectible and then you may have gotten a levy and you're like, why did I get a levy? It says that I'm currently not collectible. And it could have been that you were in a different status that allowed the IRS to do that. So this gives you some information up front to answer those questions. So thank you, Josh, for expanding on that. If we can go to the next slide, I now just want to share with you about the taxpayer roadmap. This was a huge accomplishment too. A lot of times, you know, we're in this journey, this journey going through figuring out our taxes and such like that. And this roadmap, the taxpayer roadmap, is really, it illustrates on a very high level the stages that you and that taxpayers go through. And from getting answers to law questions all the way through to audits, appeals, litigation, and collection. You can see a little bit of that on the map there, but if you click on the link, you will have access to a larger map that's in English and both Spanish, but it really gives you an idea from when a tax return is filed and then everything that goes up from there and all the different areas that it covers and how it functions and intersects just like a road does within the IRS. Various phases that the roadmap covers that may be on your journey is about tax return preparation, tax return processing, notices, exams, appeals, collection, and litigation. In fact, my background is with collection, and so I was the project lead for that specific side of the section. It's systemic advocacy that the folks here and our knowledge are the ones who put all that information together, and then you know that creative designers made it look beautiful. But it's pretty amazing when you look at that and you're pretty awestruck at, hey, this is our system and this is all the intersections and everything that can possibly on a high level happen, right? So in addition to, Ben had talked about earlier about get help pages. on our irs.gov TAS's page. But also based on the roadmap, TAS has created a new online interactive experience, and it's really using the roadmap. You can go there and you can click on different areas of how to get information and the next steps to resolve an issue. And you can do that by either putting in a notice or a letter number. You can click on one of those map stations. You see on that map on the picture that there's sort of like dots and black dots which are intersections. You can click on that and it'll tell you if you're whether you are in the process. If you're here, this is what's going on. This is probably what happened. These are the next steps you can take and such like that. So it's a great tool that you can, one, get familiar with the process of all the roadmap and the journey that one may take within the IRS, but also how to get help in the next step from letters that you receive and interactions that you may have. So I wanted to provide that to you. And there's a link that I am going to add and provide to you right now that you can click on and get further information on that. Now I want to pass it on to my colleague, Lisa.
Thank you, CJ. My name is Lisa Gabriel, and I also work as systemic advocate with CJ. And that taxpayer roadmap is an impressive accomplishment. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to talk about what else TAS does. TAS reports to Congress. The National Taxpayer Advocate is statutorily required to submit 2 reports to Congress each year. The annual report, which is delivered in January, and an objectives report, which is delivered in June. The National Taxpayer Advocate delivers these reports to the Senate Committee on Finance and the House Committee on Ways and Means with no prior review or comment from the Commissioner, the Secretary of Treasury, to include Treasury officers and other employees, or the Office of Management and Budget. The annual report includes an analysis of 10 most serious problems encountered by taxpayers, legislative and administrative recommendations for solving those problems, and a discussion of the year's 10 most frequently litigated tax issues. Previously, the annual report used to include 20 most serious problems, but because of the Taxpayer First Act limits, the report now only reports out on 10 most serious problems. The latest report, the 2019 annual report to Congress, starts with a look at the Taxpayer First Act. The first group of most serious problems focuses on IRS efforts to revise its customer service strategy and some of the key issues it needs to address if it's truly going to transform ways it serves taxpayers and practitioners, and also how the IRS's ability to improve customer service is tied to its IT modernization efforts and how adequate IRS funding ultimately impacts both these areas. The remaining most serious problems look at a more focused problems facing taxpayers and practitioners in the areas of customer service and enforcement. We also have what's called the Purple Book, and the Purple Book presents the 58 legislative recommendations intended to strengthen taxpayer rights and improve administration. Now, this brings us to the Objectives Report to Congress. The Objective Report to Congress describes the goals and activities planned by the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate for the coming fiscal year. For fiscal year 2021, in the preface, the newly appointed National Taxpayer Advocate, Erin Collins, discusses starting in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges it presents, the accomplishments of her predecessors, her role as the new National Taxpayer Advocate, and the Taxpayer First Act Congress enacted in 2019. Next slide, please. Now we have other TAS programs, and one of those programs is the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel. The Taxpayer Advocacy Panel is a federal advisory committee, which is an independent panel of citizen volunteers who listen to taxpayers. They identify taxpayer issues and make suggestions for improving the IRS and customer satisfaction on behalf of taxpayers. Taxpayers will have the opportunity to provide direct feedback to the IRS through TAP. The TAP members, there's the TAP members from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. and 1 member abroad who represent international taxpayers. This means that the U.S. citizen working or living or doing business abroad or in a U.S. territory. This gives taxpayers a chance to speak up. And a way to do that is to contact your TAP member to share your comments and suggestions. And this can be done on going to improveirs.org, or you can call the number of 1-888-912-1227. Now, they cannot help with individual tax problems, but they are there to receive your suggestions or comments on how to improve the IRS. This group annually around March or April is looking for new members. So if you or anyone you know is interested in being a volunteer panel member, keep your eyes open for recruitment messages. And those will be found on improveirs.org or TAS's website, Taxpayer Advocate, irs.gov, general media, and social media outlets. TAP members do serve a 3-year term, and to be a member, you have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to be current with your federal tax obligations. You have to be willing to commit 200 to 300 volunteer hours during a year and pass a Federal Bureau Investigation criminal background. If you want to find out more about what TAP does or about being a member, feel free to call the number or visit the website. Next slide, please. Want to know even more? These are those who are social media savvy and probably have every possible app on their phone. We urge you to check out our TAS website or sign up to follow us on social media for tax help or the latest news. TAS is now using social media sites to deliver tax-related messages, providing upcoming event information. As a part of our outreach and education activities, we hold problem-solving day events locally in each state, and announcements about those and other events will also be made through these communication vehicles. And I will turn it back over to Ben.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. This is bringing us to the conclusion of the presentation. We've had a lot of great information shared, all with the focus and goal of helping taxpayers avoid delays in processing and then ultimately receipt of really important tax refunds people need to keep up with necessary living expenses and all sorts of other things. So I think, we've shared a lot of information and some of it is a little complex. If you remember anything from today's presentation, I think the takeaway is remember, the Taxpayer Advocate Service is your voice at the IRS, and that there are all sorts of great resources, including our clinics in both Nebraska and Iowa, to provide representation and other services, as well as other like tax preparation services that were discussed. So remember, that TAS is here, the LITCs are here, and can usually get you to the right place or the right information. So help spread the word, tell everybody you know about our agencies and organizations. If you run into anybody that has any type of IRS federal tax issue, there's a whole bunch of good and solid professionals here to help. TAS is not necessarily a substitute for normal IRS processes or procedures, so not necessarily every situation qualifies for assistance, but we always try to get you everything possible to help you resolve the issue and set you up for success. So I do want to thank all of our presenters today and for all of their input and all the great information shared, and then also all the attendees for joining. And it looked like we did have some questions, I think, that have been answered. We'll try to get to the others here. And with that, I can open it up to the other presenters if there are any other bits of information or anything else that anybody wanted to share.
This is Andrea. Ben, I can address, there's a question here in the question and answer box that Lou asks, if I have an individual tax related issue with the IRS, what is the best way to communicate with the IRS? And I think what you just said, Ben, is a nice a nice lead into that question. You know, if you are looking for general information about a tax situation, you know, like, oh, I'm curious about the earned income credit or whatever topic, the IRS has a lot of great information on its site. And I've been putting some links to various things as people ask questions in the chat, you know, so for general information, going to the IRS website is probably the best place to go. But if you have a question like specific to your situation, maybe you get a letter and you're wondering what's going on, you know, your first step would be to call the IRS. And if there's a number, like if you get a notice, there will be a number on it. And that number would go to like the part of the IRS that is handling that issue. If you've ever had to try to call the IRS, it's a very big, huge organization. So it is a little daunting and sometimes you do have to wait on hold, but that would be the first step, because if you try to do something online, or like email a question or something, they're just not going to be able to address your specific situation. In my practice with taxpayers, you know, the IRS is also very concerned about identity theft and protecting privacy. So, you know, generally the taxpayer needs to be the one to make that call, because the IRS is going to want to make sure that it's actually you that they're talking to. If you do run into problems, you know, when you're talking to the IRS or trying to resolve your issue, if you talk to TAS or a low-income taxpayer clinic or another tax practitioner, you know, there are releases and things that we may have you sign so we can get information. But generally, I would say, Lou, if you have a specific issue, try calling the IRS first. But, you know, there may be a time where you do have to go to TAS or somewhere else. But that, I don't know if anyone else from TAS wants to add to that, but generally try calling.
Yeah, I think that's on point, Andrea. In addition, often notices will have a response section. Sometimes they're kind of buried, you know, at the end or in a weird spot within the notice. And then often they'll provide like a fax response or a mail-in response. So I think your answer was on point there, unless one of my colleagues has something to expand upon, but generally phone and mail. And I will just add, usually IRS is not calling folks unless the taxpayer has requested a call or otherwise scheduled some type of call to occur. I know that that comes up from time to time as well, so I just wanted to kind of plug that real quick. Usually IRS is not calling folks unless they've done something to trigger that to happen. So, all right, well, with that, I think that concludes our presentation for today. Again, thank you everybody for attending and our panelists for the great information. I hope you got a lot of useful info that will help you navigate this filing season without any speed bumps or anything. And you know, we hope that you can pass go with confidence and get that green light without any issues this upcoming filing season. So thank you everybody again, and have a wonderful day and weekend.